Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Sparring Partners on APIs. And today we're going to talk about APIs in a really broad way. So there's a lot of interest in APIs, but a lot of the interest is focused on a specific type of APIs and applications. And looking more at the operator, and today we are expanding that into from two dimensions. So we're going to talk both about the operators and the enterprise and how the two can talk to each other for a mutual benefit, and also how the scope of the API, how wide the scope of the API is. So it's not just a few use cases, but it's a broader set of things that you can do with APIs. And I have the pleasure today, and you have the pleasure to listen to and to talk to Harpreet Geekee, and he is the co-founder and CTO at Shabodi. Harpreet, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you for having me.
So it's a pleasure because we talked about it before, and I know that you guys are doing really a lot of work in so many areas. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective. So to get into that, maybe you can tell us more about as a co-founder, why did you start Shabodi, and what is it you're focusing on?
Absolutely. This is my second startup, and it was an interesting reason why we started this one, right? So if you really think about my background, and just to introduce myself, I'm Harpreet Geekee. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Shabodi. My background comes from early days of Nortel and Cisco's and Juniper's, where I was actually responsible for not only representing Nortel's interest into 3GPP standards, and I'm talking R4, R5 timelines, right, in 1999, 2000s, where we were actually trying to build this next generation network to be utilized by devices to facilitate higher bandwidth communication, right? Separation of control plane, data plane, call managers, and all that sort of stuff happened in those days. But when we moved on to the Cisco environment, or when I got started working for Cisco, I quickly learned that it's not about just building the networks, but it's also about enabling the solutions on top of that. So enabling solutions is critical for the success of the network to be utilized, consumed, scaled, and actually get the better revenues, ROIs, and consumptions out of it. And at Cisco, I had a privilege of running 8 vertical solutions for them, and ended up becoming the CTO for Cisco Canada. But better yet, when I moved to Juniper as a global CTO for their financial services vertical, it was even more predominant on how to use the SD-WAN infrastructure to consume and utilize for the trade finance guys, for the Wall Street guys, and the New York Stock Exchange, and so on and so forth, and also in the core banking environment. So I've always been passionate about how the network, which is, for some people, unfortunately, it's just a big fat pipe, which is, in my opinion, the biggest investment and the most intelligent asset that anybody can have, can be utilized in a very effective way to provide the services and the capabilities on a bespoke nature. When I need, what I need, how I need, I get it from the network instead of just forcing something on saying, hey, here's a pipe, just send the bits and bytes around that. So that was a thesis, that was a premise. And lucky for us, 3GPP allowed R15 in, by the definition of the service-based architecture in 3GPP during R15, R14 releases. It became very apparent that the next generation networks is about programmable advanced networks. And it's not about just exposing the network services to be consumed by anybody and everybody. It is about enabling applications and systems to utilize the services on their need basis and not just as a pipe. So that was a thesis, that was a premise. So Shabodi is industry's first platform which actually enables any application to control and utilize the programmable networks, right? So that's the foundation thesis of our product, NetAware. We started the company in October 2020, and we've been blessed in the last 4 years to have a reasonable success in this arena.
Absolutely. So, but and it's a platform that is useful both to operators. So, I mean, you work with operators and the enterprise. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how does that work? How can you be on both ends? Which is essential because it's exactly it's the connection between the two that's what's missed. It's what's needed.
Absolutely. Now, as I mentioned, right, network is an extremely intelligent and a valuable asset. Whether you deployed it as a private enterprise network in the enterprise world, where I'm actually building up an SD-WAN or a private 5G or a private Wi-Fi network or whatever it is that we are building up, to be consumed for bespoke needs of that particular enterprise, whether it's a manufacturing plant, whether it's a financial institution, whether it's a stadium, and so on and so forth, or whether I'm actually building it for the service product environment where they're trying to figure out how to go beyond just selling their devices, the SIM cards, and the data plan to the consumers, and how to actually penetrate within the enterprise market. So there is a need to exploit and utilize and monetize the network services on both sides of the houses, right? We started our journey on the enterprise side of the world, primarily because 5G SA was not available in 2021. The service providers were still trying to catch up. And we quickly realized when we actually went for our first deployment in the manufacturing plants in 2021, in spite of the fact that 5G provides a whole pile of capabilities, Wi-Fi is there to stay. SD-WAN is still there to stay. The connectivity to the outside world is going to happen through various different ways of network connectivity that exist today. So it makes sense for us to provide those bespoke APIs and structures and expose their applications and consume it in a synergistic way that the service products will utilize. And in service product world, Kamara was starting up as a great initiative. And I believe it's a very important initiative to normalize and standardize some of the services APIs. But those need to be consumed by the application world. So our platform, we provide the ability to transform from one layer of the network abstractions to another layer of abstractions. If there are different APIs being exposed by different networks, like such as Wi-Fi or 5G, we actually can normalize it to Kamara or whatever. We were actually very proud to have industry's first Kamara implementation for enterprises. And then more importantly, provide that capability for invocations and consumption for applications bespoke needs in the particular environment that they work in. For example, in the manufacturing, if a SCADA controller needs a particular capabilities, let the SCADA controller call a simple API to consume the network services, whether it's in the enterprise world or in the service product. So we're blessed. We saw the evolution of network becoming very intelligent resources, exposing the services, and we had the right platform to capture both sides of the market.
Yes, and we're not going to talk only about Wi-Fi or not primarily on Wi-Fi, but you actually raise a very important point because today we talk a lot about the GSMA APIs with Kamara, which is, as I say, excellent. However, also, as you say, a lot of the private networks are Wi-Fi. I consider Wi-Fi to be a private network like 5G. So APIs are already, you started, as I say, with Wi-Fi. So what does it mean now moving forward? Because if you have an API that it's defined by a mobile operator, but it's, it kind of covers kind of functionality that it's also available on Wi-Fi. So how do the two work together? And how do you combine that kind of functionality and need?
Actually, you said it very well, right? So if I look at the Wi-Fi Alliance work, if I look at the work which is happening in IETF and IEEE for other networks as well, along with the work which is happening in 3GPP and GSMA, it's very apparent to see that a similar kind of capabilities, programmability, interfaces are coming up, right? So for example, quality of service, whether it's quality of service on Wi-Fi or quality on demand in Kamara, is a similar construct which are coming up. Device identification, device validation on Wi-Fi is similar to some of the stuff that we are talking about on Kamara side of things. Now, the issue comes out is if I am a consumer of those APIs, do I now go and build disparate application interfaces for different type of networks? Should I go and say, I think I'm going to be on a Wi-Fi, so let me actually call a QoS API to actually go and manipulate, on DSCP or whatever on Wi-Fi versus the PDU session on the 5G using a completely different API structures or not? That will stop the adoption. That will actually hinder the adoption of these extremely valuable work and APIs that are being published by both sides of the houses, right? So what we in Shabodi believe is if we can actually normalize those APIs, if we can actually combine those APIs, provide a single API for application developers and our application instance, which is primarily using that particular interface in a cohesive fashion, we actually hit the mark. So that instead of us, the network geeks, trying to be application centric, we want the applications to become more network aware, which basically means is they know what they want at any given time. I want to send a message to with the lowest latency, or I want to actually uplink a video, hence I need a particular capability, or I want to get a location at this given time for my particular device or whatever it is that I'm trying to get. They know what it is. If we can provide simple interfaces for them to consume and bind those interfaces and utilize those interfaces in a synergistic fashion, I think we hit a home run on that one, right? And that's where the thesis is for Shabodi. We utilize Camara to provide and exploit the service provider work, because without that, we cannot have the interoperability between the service providers. We utilize the Wi-Fi APIs because without that, we cannot invoke and control and manipulate the Wi-Fi interfaces for beamforming and MIMOs and so on and so forth. But for this application, it's still the same API. Get me uplink, get me bandwidth, get me location, get me device quality, status, right? Or the security credentials for a particular device. And in that particular way, it's one API, disparate network interfaces, disparate network accesses, which gets invoked on to provide the synergistic approach. And I think that will drive the adoption. We actually have seen a tremendous uptake on some of this stuff. That strategy enables the application vendors to build once and utilize their application on multiple service providers, multiple enterprise networks, multiple instances over and over again, because application vendors are not trying to build bespoke API for manufacturing plant 1 and manufacturing plant 2. The SCADA controller guy, the PLC guys are actually just building it once. And if they can consume one API and work on Wi-Fi's, LTEs, SCEFs, don't underestimate SCEFs, NEFs, Camaras, or SRv6 or MPLS, it makes the life easier.
Not only that, but even from the operator's point of view, it basically enhances the value of their own APIs, because basically whatever your API is doing, you can reach a wider market, or you reach the old market that you need to cover. And if you are separate, then you cannot, you're not as compelling to the enterprise. Let's put it that way.
I love that word. You're not that compelling to the enterprise today, because in a service product, and service products are great friends of ours, right? And we have a lot of those service product customers right now. They're struggling to how to go beyond selling a SIM card, how to go beyond selling just an iPhone or a Samsung phone or some other phone or a data plan, right? Because those things are consumed by humans. And then if I've sold it to my employees, I have 200 employees, say, that's it, right? What is my growth factor onto it? So the growth for service product is to somehow get into the operational side of the enterprises, whether it's in the warehouse, the logistics, or the manufacturing itself, or the physical safety security, or something out there where they can actually provide data protection, provide cybersecurity stuff, provide pervasive connectivity, and potentially provide a whole network without getting enterprises to invest in very expensive, heavy build-outs of private networks, right? So there's an opportunity for our friends in service provider to help our customers in enterprises, specifically the ones which have real-time network needs, diverse network needs, to consume the services because of the pervasive network capability that they have, because of the secure mechanisms that they have in place, because of the diverse management and uptime capability that they have. They're carrier-grade networks, which can potentially meet some of the needs of the enterprise markets out there.
Yes, so the opportunity is there, but operators are just moving the first steps today. And you already started working with them. So what is that you hear from them, and what is your advice in terms of how should they get started? How should they go beyond just selling the SIM card model?
So there are some service providers who are very, very progressive. I think they are trying to go and address the market head on with some of the solutions and offerings and experiment with the customers. But most of the service providers are still sitting in this world of what is a use case? How do I get through the use case journey, and how do I actually enable some of this? Why should I even enable some of the capabilities? Maybe I should just test out with some of the capabilities that are low hanging fruit and then go from there, right? So basically dip their toes into the water and test the waters before they start swimming into it. Which is a great strategy. Don't get me wrong. That is the right way for us to go and address this market. But then there is also diversity between what we are seeing, for example, between some of the Asian service providers versus some of the European and North American service providers, where they are going and saying, you know what, in Asia, for example, they're more aggressive and saying, hey, I have a manufacturing facility. I'm going to lose that manufacturing facility to United States or Europe, taking back their manufacturing back to home. Or maybe there's a way for me to even optimize it further and go for it. Is there an opportunity for me to work with service provider to leverage those APIs or leverage those services in a more cohesive way and experiment with it? Whereas on our side of the pond right now, we are still trying to tip and say, maybe I can just try with a small little fraud API here or there, and basically limit our consumption to some well-known use cases and see if there's an uptake. And I'm not trying to say that one way or another is wrong, but what we are saying is maybe there's a middle ground somewhere for us all to look at it. Right? So there is for example, if I go back to Kamara, there are great 27 APIs that have been published. Most of them are in fraud, KPI, KYC, and so on and so forth, but there are a lot of in location, in device status, device security. There are a lot of them in QRD, and those are the areas as well. Maybe there's a synergistic approach that we can actually provide to consume and provide business opportunities around that kind of a stuff. So our advice, and we are trusted advisor to quite a few of these service providers today, is yes, we are dependent on the network equipment providers to expose some of the network APIs. Yes, we are dependent on TM Forum and OSS, BSS implementation. On certain cases, if they have not moved to TM Forum, they still have SNMPs or netcoms and so on and so forth over there. But those are just building blocks that we need to move forward from. There are a lot of proprietary interfaces within the network that exist today. Service providers for the last 10, 15 years have been investing heavily in building SCPs, STPs, and so on and so forth. There is a lot of information in the OSS, BSS that we can still fetch. There's a lot of proprietary interfaces from the network equipment provider on their PCFs and EPCFs or whatever it is that they have in the network that we can orchestrate and so on and so forth. So let us help you build and those transformations, and let us figure out how to go to market together to capture the market that enterprise requires today to move forward. On the enterprise side, we know it from our experiences in the enterprise networks, every 5 to 7 years, they have to do a refresh. They have to come back and they have to refresh their network because the networks are coming to end of life, right? For example, if they have token ring in their network, it is coming to an end of life, or it has already gone to end of life 3 years ago. So if you're relying on a network where there is no support and your mass production is dependent on it, it is going to hit you sooner or later, and you are doing a refresh. So if you are doing a refresh, consider the option of utilizing this pervasiveness, this secure connectivity, this programmability aspect with that the service provider market could provide, either as a MOCN, as a private 5G least frequency model or whatever it is, or as a service provider implementation themselves. So there is a potential synergistic match that will happen between the enterprise and the service providers. And we are trying to be a catalyst in those conversations today. And we are seeing some very positive results. And we think that 2025 will be the year where all of these things are going to come together and the market is going to catch it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it seems like there is a lot of interest, and a lot of the interest comes from the fact that it's an opportunity for monetization, and clearly it is. But on the other hand, we have had APIs for a long time and didn't produce much in the way of revenues. So why is it different now? And also, what kind of business models can allow monetization? Let's talk about from the operator's perspective first, and then we'll go to the enterprise.
So you're absolutely right, Monica, right? If I go back to my early days when I was actually working on a frame relay or ISA for BRI, PRI, ISDN, which I still don't know what it stands for. If I go back to even those good old days, we were talking about programmability of our applications and consumers and devices consuming those kind of interface, and it never caught up. And I believe the foundational reason it didn't catch up was, first of all, the networks were very monolithic. We didn't have that ability to expose the network the way we do today, right? And I'm very grateful for the work that has happened in the 3GPP over the last 5-6 years, and more importantly, also in the IETF and IEEE consortiums to adopt this programmability aspects out. So it's finally happening. The dream that we all had as younger people, now we are old, as a younger engineer starting up in PNRs or Nortel, of actually enabling application consume our network in a more cohesive fashion is becoming a reality. But the fact which comes down to is, well, yes, we have these network APIs. What does it mean for service provider to monetize it? Do they build a metering around it? Kamara doesn't talk about metering. There is no monetization strategy today, unfortunately, being built around there. But at the same time, there's a huge amount of investment which is going to go out to build these services out. So what is the best way for them to consume and provide it? Is it providing it on a per SIM card, saying, oh, I'm going to sell you 5,000 sensor SIM cards. That basically means that I'm going to charge you for 1 megabit per second bandwidth or whatever it is, and so on and so forth, and then configure it? Or is it in a cohesive utilization-based metric? So which is something that AWS, Azure, and Google have proven as a right way, for example, for cloud services, right? Cloud places how much ingress, egress have, how much CPU utilize, and based on that, you pay for whatever you consume. Is that a model that they should be considering and enhancing it? Or is it going to be a bespoke implementation strategy that they need to do? From what we see, there's not one shoe that fits all sizes. Unfortunately, right? It all comes down to is what is the market service provider trying to address in their geographical region. Remember, service providers are limited to their geography kind of environment. What kind of a business relationship they have, what kind of demand exists, and so on and so forth. But we from Shabodi have been working as trusted advisor to some of these service providers to help them understand not only the use cases, but also potentially the monetization structures around the consumption of those use cases. And what does it mean from the cost perspective for them to build out this capability from the network deployment perspective, but also from the API consumption, API exposure, API management aspects as well. Right? It's not about just writing an API and just putting it on some API gateway and say, hey, take it. There's a whole pile of security aspects. There's a whole pile of invocation aspects. There's a whole pile of metering and operational aspects that needs to be taken care of it. And that's what we are helping some of our clients with.
Yeah, it just seems like thinking of, you're an operator, you get your APIs, you put them on this aggregator marketplace as if you're selling something, and then off, we're done. It is definitely more than that. And and also I was recently talking to an operator and said, well, we can sell directly to the enterprise, or and that for some APIs it might work just fine, but that's not going to be, I would think, the dominant model. That's not the dominant way to monetize. Clearly, if you go to an enterprise directly, you are going to make 100% of the revenues from the API. But if you go through aggregators and other parties, clearly your share of the revenues is smaller. But on the other hand, you might actually get so much of a bigger market. So can you tell us, how do you see this sort of the ecosystem coming together from a business perspective, in terms of, the role of the aggregation? How important are they, and what role do they play in the monetization?
So I'm not a business guy, so I will actually try to address it with a little bit of a technology spin to it, right? If you really think about the aggregator model today, so there are aggregators which are being announced to aggregate and provide the same Camara APIs that have been standardized in the Camara standards policies,
Mm.
which makes me question again, why do we need a standardization if I need an aggregator to further standardize and normalize the APIs, right? From that perspective out there. And then also these aggregators are doing it primarily for one type of technology, which is 5G SA kind of a stuff. So what happens with the other accesses, other capabilities and structures out there? So I think the aggregator model at the different layers needs to evolve as it comes around. Yes, there is a need for aggregators to provide aggregation of various network interfaces for our enterprise. For example, we need an aggregator to facilitate network roaming kind of a consumption and capabilities out there from that perspective. But do we need an aggregator to just translate the same API, which is standardized Camara API for all intended purposes, to be redistributed over and over again, and so on and so forth? So that's a debate that we can get into. But we think there is a critical need for aggregators to enable multiple network types and accesses to be aggregated. There's a need for aggregators if there are variances in various service provider network APIs to consolidate and map it and sell it as a single Camara interface, and then so on and so forth. The second question which you asked for is about marketplace side of the house. So how does the consumption and all of this happen? So 3GPP, which I think is a phenomenal standards body under SA6 working group, talks about CAPF, Common API Framework, which basically says that the APIs eventually will be consumed by application functions, to be very precise. So if it's an application which is consuming the API, it is not an enterprise. Enterprise is using the application to provide the services for it. The application could be an entity like SAP or something else, or the SCADA controller from Schneider or Rockwell, to actually consume that API, or a drone manufacturer, right? To consume those network APIs to provide a need or fulfill a need or a requirement of an enterprise. So the question which comes down to is, who is paying what, or consuming what API, and how is it going to be the money flow going to happen? So application developer is the one which is eventually consuming the API. The enterprise is invoking that API based on their profiles and services that they have from the service provider or from their own network equipment providers. And then the application instance, which is running on a device, is the one which is actually providing the manipulation or requesting the manipulation for that particular device at any given time. So the ecosystem which is evolving requires this entire network API to come together, ecosystem to come together. Marketplaces is a great place for us to build developer networks. It is a great place for us to consume some of those APIs from there. So yes, I can publish all of that stuff and go from there. But the application invocation, the security token, the management of it, the capability of it is beyond a particular marketplace or an aggregator's role. It is really where a platform like us can actually come and help facilitate the tokenization, the secure invocation, the application instance actually making the right call at the right network interface in an authorized, secure fashion for a scalable deployments is critical as well. So I think this ecosystem is going to evolve. Marketplaces are going to be more than an API gateway. and an invocation of saying, oh, Monica is authorized to bind this thing. It's not Monica, it's the 15,000 applications that Monica is writing. That needs to be authorized. The service providers market is going to go beyond aggregators because it's not about same Kamara APIs getting aggregated again. But the thing, it's about multiple network interfaces, multiple bespoke services getting aggregated and sold to facilitate roaming, to facilitate seamless invocation across the service product domain. And also, as the enterprise and service product is going further up, the private public hybrid network ecosystem is also going to evolve, which facilitates the need for some of these new players to come up to provide this complete application API ecosystem. And I think that's where the things are going to evolve. But we are waiting with a hell breath over here to see how the market will evolve and how the adoption will go forward. But we believe that the time is ripe right now.
Absolutely. And at the same time, for on the aggregator side, it looks like who is the aggregator is not it's not a trivial question, and it's an important variable here. So we've seen Ericsson launching an initiative. Nokia is kind of doing the same, and so. But at the same time, they're also heavily involved otherwise. And we're trying to move to networks that are more disaggregated, where there are multi-vendors, and then there is a value in ensuring sort of the independent diversity and flexibility. So how do you see that playing into the dynamics here? How important it is to have an aggregator or a platform that is independent?
I think it's critical. But before I answer that question, I have to admit we're very, very grateful to Ericsson to make that announcement and Nokia to follow up with this announcement. When the big giants like them stimulate the market by making those kind of announcements, it actually triggers all the players to take a notice and say, well, what is going on? Maybe we should, it creates a little bit of a FOMO, and it actually stimulates the market to go the way we all want it to go towards. So we are very grateful for Ericsson to kickstart the industry, to actually bootstrap this initiative and move forward onto this stuff, right? But then again, it comes down to exactly what you're talking about. Ericsson is a great company. They have phenomenal products, right? Their CCES product is phenomenal. Their Nokia as a code, Nokia orchestrator and app is a phenomenal product from Nokia side of the house. They all provide amazing capabilities for them to expose some of the network orchestrations and capabilities out there. But that said, the operators are still dependent on the timeline and the capabilities that Ericsson's and Nokia's and Samsung's and the Siemens and everybody else dictates. The network equipment providers dictates on when a certain network service can be exposed and utilized by them in whichever way they want to go from, right? From that perspective, I think it's critical for that boundary to exist, whereby the dependency on a particular network equipment provider technology is kind of minimized a little bit, right? Or reduced, minimize the wrong word, is reduced a little bit because that vendor lock-in inhibits the creativity and adoption of the market that needs to. So for example, in a certain geography of a certain, most of the operators have regional deployments and so on and so forth. And most of the enterprises who can actually adopt these kind of networks, they are multinational companies too. They're not just one regional manufacturers and so on and so forth. So they're all global companies. So having an opportunity for them to service providers exploit similar or same service, because if they're different, it actually adds operational costs and so on and so forth. Same service over disparate multiple network equipment providers and not having a lock-in from a particular vendor is critical for this growth of the service products, right? And similarly, enterprises, even though they don't, I said network is an intelligent resource and should not be used as a pipe, they still want to have a flexibility to actually have various network service providers providing the service to either same facility or multiple facilities they have in the geography location with same application. So the application which is consuming this API needs to work in multiple regions at the same time. So I think Ericsson and Nokia are doing a phenomenal job by triggering all of this stuff. I think there's a recognition that the vendor lock-in is a real issue. Locking to a particular technology is a real issue potential that can happen. We are waiting anxiously for the network equipment providers to expose some of these standardized interface. But at the same time, from Shabodi's perspective, proprietary interfaces are as good as a standardized interface because it's a service which needs to be standardized. So we can actually work on various proprietary and standardized interfaces from them. And it is important for the service providers to exploit and expose their APIs in a more cohesive way to enable various applications to consume it, and the enterprises to validate the fact that there is a need for a pervasive, secure, non-fraudulent invocations to provide some of their OT services that they need to have in place.
And I guess that, we come to it from a different perspective. We're always there in the sense that it's a many-to-many kind of environment. Many operators, many technologies, many enterprise types, many APIs, many use cases for the APIs. So the APIs is kind of like sort of a wide-ranging, but the flexibility is key to adoption, which I guess is the problem. Was the problem why in the past it didn't actually work, because you didn't have that kind of flexibility. I mean, aside from the other reasons that you mentioned, but you need to be as wide as possible. So now let's look at a little bit more from the enterprise point of view, because when I talk to people, most of the time is, they would mention banks, right? For the primary API use case. And that's true in in the US and Europe, and not necessarily in other parts of the world. So, but your work is actually with a much broader range of enterprises. So maybe you can start and say, who is interested, and where do you see that, there might be verticals that are not interested yet just because they haven't thought about it or they're not got into that, but where you see that there is an opportunity, even though there might not be so much activity, or where there is activity and it's not just the banks.
Yeah. No, so as I mentioned earlier, right, when we started the Shabodi journey, we actually started on the enterprise front. We started our journey with the enterprise market. And it's just recently, about in 2023, 2024, that we started focusing on both enterprise and the service provider market. And when we started an enterprise market, the easiest thing to talk to CIO, CTO, because they were our primary contacts into the enterprises at that time, was this quality on demand kind of a thing. Hey, you know what? If you have an H2, 3, 4 stream happening, why do you want to have a provision service for both uplink and downlink when all the camera is doing is an uplink, right? So we can actually consume the network resources. We can actually be more effective in the utilization of the network and so on and so forth. And then when the service provider market came along, it was more about being pervasive connectivity all over the place. And we are trying to talk to some of our enterprise customers who are very interested in utilizing service provider entities for providing that network connectivity instead of doing the private 5G build out themselves. So you're absolutely right. The current adoption is about proving out the network API in the North American and European market in a financial services context, right? Hey, today, if I'm doing a banking transaction, I get a CPaaS-based OTP on an SMS and say, please authorize this by putting this 6-digit number that the bank has sent to validate your verification. But that doesn't prove that the phone that I got that OTP on is actually my phone, right? It could be some hacker's phone or some other spammer's phone, and who has just duplicated my SIM card, and they're still getting the message and so on and so forth. So that's where the device identification, KYC, SIM swap APIs become very prominent. And it's like, hey, if I know that the device and the SIM card matching has changed, The IMIE and MC matching has changed. So I know that the device that the SIM card was supposed to be talking to is not the right SIM card, so potentially it's a fraud. So that's where it started, but it's a proven industry. Right? OTP is going through it, and fraud and spams is actually becoming a big thing over there. So it was a great industry that we could actually utilize some of the network APIs around. But if I move forward to my customer base in enterprises, when I say enterprise, I typically mean manufacturing plants, ports and logistics environments, the mines, the stadiums, and these big venues which actually have a cohesive need for network resources on demand kind of a stuff around there, right? So if I'm actually deploying a network in enterprise for say a PLC or a SCADA controller to utilize the pervasive network from carrier grade, they get the resiliency, they get the fact that it's a secure carrier grade uptime network, so the chances of it going down and them impacting their line is hard. There are ways today with, for example, Mockon and other models from service provider to make sure that data doesn't go out, kind of a stuff. But then there is always this issue in the back of the mind about saying fraud. What if some sensor comes in and pretends, some QC camera comes and pretends to be a QC camera of my manufacturing plant, for example, and say, you know what, I'm trying to turn this line down, industrial espionage, all that stuff happens all the time. So there is an opportunity for us to use the same APIs in manufacturing. Just an example, right? So that QC camera, we could actually use a location, even though it's fixed location, we still know it hasn't moved. So that is good. We can actually use a device identification to say, hey, we know that this QC camera is what it says it's supposed to be. We can use a SIM swap to go say, yes, nobody has taken a SIM out of that particular QC camera and using somewhere else to actually utilize that. We can actually use all of those constructs that we are trying to use in fintech to validate authenticity of the request coming even in the OT net, right? And then actually utilize all of that stuff. And then take it one step forward. These QC cameras are very small little IoT devices. They don't have the intelligence and capabilities out there. What if the enterprise and application guys can create and author a network API which senses that this is a request coming from this particular QC camera, device identification, device status, and so on and so forth. And then based on that, trigger the request the appropriate network services out there. So there's an opportunity for enterprises to author their own bespoke network consumption APIs, which can be tied to all of these capabilities as well. So holistically, what I'm trying to get at is there's an opportunity to not only use the APIs that are being used for a very money, to go beyond into multiple areas and so forth. For example, in the football, American football, NFL stadiums and so forth, in the other places, similar constructs exist of validating the users and making sure that the device authentication and fraudulent activities are prohibited. For example, if I want to buy a beer when I'm actually watching a football game with Bruins, hockey game with Bruins and so forth, and I try to go get a beer, instead of doing, even though I'm old, they still ask for an ID to give me my beer. I don't know why. I can actually use my authenticated device to actually get the KYC done to say, here's my profile. Please use So there are multiple use cases that we are currently working on to enable the similar constructs out there. But we do see fraud, QoD, location, along with additional APIs such as deterministic path between the two endpoints, which is very critical for manufacturing real-time systems, for manipulation of the device or querying of the device application instance and application insights, and so forth as a critical APIs and the services that is coming from the network in demand today in the current use cases that we are actually working.
So the picture you're painting, sort of in general, for that obviously there's a lot of variety in terms of the enterprise you work with, is that it's not one API, one service. Yep. It's like multiple APIs and multiple services, in the sense that like the location one, or the fraud one, that is, when you say, okay, I know what fraud is, but it's actually what we're telling us, it's actually fraud is a much wider kind of concept. I mean, the fraud API can be used in a wider sense of, illicit activity. That is not what we usually, it's not what the thought of what comes to mind in terms of fraud. So it's like a wider thing, and you just need to kind of think about how is that going to help me? And maybe the enterprise needs help in terms of, this is without having to know much about the network. You say, okay, this API is called whatever, but it's going to help me on doing something that is not in the name of the API. Like quality of experience. QD is like, well, you don't think it has to do anything with financial transactions, but it does.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think you said it very, very well. It's not about one service, one API kind of a stuff. It is about amalgamating multiple services, meet the need of what needs to happen, and providing that flexibility. And that's where I think, getting locked into a single vendor is also painful activity. Ability to author your own APIs and capabilities based on the published APIs from all of that stuff, from the network service providers and network equipment providers is critical for the enterprises to succeed and go from there. And I think you said it very, very well. It is not about just publishing and assuming that people will understand how to use it. It is about having that trusted relationship and ability for us all in an ecosystem to communicate the applicability of these APIs into multiple disparate environments and situations that exist today. And I think that's where we all are working and striving towards. Some of the service product lines that we work with, that's where their the network programmability business units and so on and so forth are focusing on. That enterprise CIOs and CTOs, they're looking for not just a lock-in, but they're also looking for how can you help me reduce my cost? How can you actually help me get my better ROI? How can you actually help me increase my production or mining or getting more customer experience in the stadiums, because that is my bread and butter. So don't tell me there's a more cost. Tell me what the value that you can bring in a secure, scalable fashion for us. And that conversation, as you said very well, Monica, needs to happen and is, lucky for us, happening now. And I think this evolution is what is going to drive the adoption in 2025 and beyond for the network consumption.
Now, at the beginning, you mentioned, and this is something that I noticed too, that operators, they basically, their approach is, let's try with a few APIs and see how that goes. But if from the enterprise point of view, you need to have the whole buffet and then pick what you need, that seems like it's not necessarily the best strategy. You don't want to necessarily have them all, but you want to be more than a single API just to see how it goes. So can you tell us, what is that you see in terms of, what are the most popular APIs? What's the top 10 from, I guess, from the operators and from the enterprise? And how does it change by geography?
Excellent question. From Shabodi's perspective, right? As I said earlier, we endorse Kamara, not only for the service provider, but also for the enterprise market, as a standardized way to have the private-public hybrid interoperability of the networks and everything. We participate very actively in Kamara and also in 3GPP and TM forums and so on and so forth. The interesting aspect that we are seeing is, in spite of the fact that there are 27 APIs that have been ratified in Kamara today, we saw 16 of them getting adopted for various use cases outside, and those are the first ones that we actually implemented to be consumed in not exactly the Kamara fashion, but also in the abstracted way or simplified way by the clients that we have been working at. And as I said earlier, the starting point for every CIO, CTO is, how can I actually increase their experience for production, mining, or whatever it is that they're interested in, to their core goal in a secure and scalable fashion. So in that case, QoD is always a great starting point. But it's not a complex QoD that we talk about from the service provider market today. It is about, hey, I really need uplink now. I need a downlink now. I'm actually sending this sensor data. It is about latency. I'm trying to send something for video inferencing, which should have a lowest jitter, or I'm trying to actually make sure that there is a combination of all of these aspects happening for a particular kind of a capabilities. Can you, based on what I need at what time, can I get that out of the service, out of the network? So it's not just one monolithic API. They're actually starting talking about dissecting and those APIs for a use of a particular capability. Location was an interesting one, but I completely understand the legal aspects about some of the legal location exposures and so on and so forth. But location from the espionage, for the cybersecurity, from the industrial security perspective is also critical. If I have a fixed asset and it seems to have moved, of course something is wrong, right? Notify me, kind of a stuff. So in that case, we are seeing some additional capabilities such as a fraud and so on and so forth, part of it, and going forward. The other interesting aspects that we talk about, and we are not seeing it yet in Kamara, but we have done a couple of implementation now, is I am an OT network. I really need to make sure that I have a deterministic shortest path in a guaranteed, predictable fashion for a particular execution happens. For example, if I'm pressing a red button in a manufacturing plant or an iPad or a physical red button, I know that it's going to go, and because it's a hardware requirement in the United States, it's going to go and shut down the line or talk to a particular sensor in a deterministic fashion. I need deterministism out of it. So that's where we talk about a deterministic path, secure access, secure invocations, and so on and so forth is critical for them. And last and the least, what we are also finding is something that we don't talk a lot about, is about the security side of all of this stuff, right? It is not just saying, publish it onto this web page and come to me, I will give you a token and do the invocation about it. They want to know, for example, which application instance is invoking what capability, why is it invoking that capability, and how it can be utilized for their better AI and data protections of the not only the network consumption, but also the impact of it on production, mining, fanfare experience, and so on and so forth, right? So those insights, those capabilities also need to come together. So those are the top set of APIs and services that we have been able to exploit and that we see a demand for over the last 3 years. And in the future, we think that those are going to be the foundation for the future growth as well, while the other APIs, such as the PDU manipulation ones and so on and so forth, come out, providing the real-time selection of the QoE at any given time come out in 2025, 2026. But I think there is a strong foundation which is being built up with some of these services today.
Yeah, so we're going to see an expanding range. And as you mentioned before, again, because our mind is like fraud for users trying to do some transaction online or connecting to the bank. That's usually that, that's the first thing that comes. If somebody asks me, what is it you do with APIs? I'll give that as the first example. But as you mentioned, there is a whole set of API relevant functionality that is for IoT devices where there is no human around. And I would say, and this is actually something really important because it's very important to have security, to make sure that those devices are doing what they do, and there is no human there to check. So if something odd happens to my phone, I'm gonna be noticing it. But if it's something happens to a camera, nobody's there to see it. So in a way, it's almost, I wouldn't say more important, but it's a different set of issues, but nevertheless quite important. And so how do you think about the human device versus the IoT device?
I'm glad you asked that. It is very interesting when we are actually building the APIs. The first thing we talk about is user experience.
Right.
If you look at anything, even in the standards bodies, or even in Camara discussion boards, or even in TF forum, everybody talked about user experience. Now the question comes down to who's the user? Is it a human being or is it a machine? And if it's a machine, what does a user experience mean for a machine? And how does it evolve from that perspective, right? I know we are the smartest beings on the planet. Humans are blessed with the wonderful brain, and we can actually see all of that stuff. But the fact of the life is we actually have limitations in the human, right? So for example, if I am not seeing something happen in 600 milliseconds, 700 milliseconds, I may think that it's slow, but I will not care much about it. If as long as my Netflix works, right, or my YouTube works into my kind of an environment perspective over there. At the same time, if it is a machine, 100 millisecond, 200 millisecond could means eternity from that perspective. It's like so many CPU cycles waiting for something to happen and waiting for a response to come back and so on and so forth. Similarly, if I'm actually a human being, I'm actually prone to entering data or capability which may or may not be important or may not be need to be prioritized at any given time. If I'm a stockbroker or a marketplace maker, a market maker in stock exchanges, of course, my everything that I'm trying to do, which is receiving the real-time stock ticker and so on and so forth, or executing a trade, which is governed by MiFID law, right, is critical for me, and that's where the time sensitivity happened. But my brain still needs to process all of that stuff over there. But the trading desk application has a very deterministic rules and policies around some of these network services and consumptions that happen. So I think this is going to be a defining structure for the services that is going to evolve. So that's why, from service product perspective, we believe that the first set of the engagements that are going to happen for network programmability is going to be in a B2B side, whereas a B2B2C or B2C is going to evolve over the next year or so. The AR, VR, the Ray-Ban's new glasses or the Apple's new glasses or the Google's new glasses are going to add to that complexity because the glasses are going to be machines which are going to be interacting with human beings, and the latency and jitters and all that stuff is going to become critical. But those are still a little bit far out for the mass adoption, for like at least 12 to 18 months away. So in that particular case, the defining moment for the APIs are going to come from enterprises and the businesses or a B2B market segment. And as it gets adopted into the consumer market, it's going to be very interesting to see how the evolution of the adoption happens. So how would I charge for it? How would I meter for it? How would I actually utilize it? What would be the user experience value that I'm going to bring in? It's easier for me to dictate it for a machine. It has to be in 300 millisecond. It has to have, a minimum of 1 gigabits or for data upload happening in the period of 10 minutes, or it needs to have a 10 megabits per second uplink, or I need to have a deterministic path for routing. Humans don't understand that. User experience is going to be completely different, and the context and the criteria for that, as defined in the current APIs, are going to be different from that perspective. So I think we are force fitting some of these APIs into the human user experience, but I think we will wait for as the AR, VR applications, as the next generation consumer applications evolve, to see exactly how these APIs are going to make an impact towards some of these capabilities, right? And then figure out how to adopt and exploit and expose these APIs in a synergistic fashion so that they can be consumed by the humans anywhere, any place, anytime, kind of an environment.
Absolutely. So there's huge amount of work ahead. So let's close with the question to look at this part. You mentioned that in 2025, you expect APIs to take off. That's 1 year. How do you see the field expanding over the 5 years in terms of what is going to be the big areas of growth? Again, we never know what's going to happen after 5 years. That's unrealistic. But we can sort of start guessing, in the next 5 years, what do you see?
So this is where I tell my wife, right? I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not a good trader of stocks as well, just for that reason. But the reason I say that 2025 is going to be an interesting year to watch from the API adoption is because I think the baseline of some of these strategies exist, right? Even though some of the capabilities have not been implemented, just announced as a POCs and everything, I think those POCs are going to translate into some production. We at Shabodi are very blessed to have few commercial production deployments now, but I think the industry is going to catch up, and that is going to create, excuse my language, some kind of a FOMO, which is actually going to trigger the adoption of all of this stuff. And I think what is happening on the service provider side as well is the service provider is getting curious, even though there are a lot of announcements, right? I think the curiosity from service provider on how to monetize, how to scale, how to compete amongst each other is going to be very interesting to watch and grow from that perspective. So 2025 is a year where it's going to scale up. The hockey stick is going to start coming in from the adoption of the existing work that has happened over the last 3-4 years. Moving forward, I think Elon and everybody else, they say it much better than anybody else, right? With the advent of autonomous cars, with the advent of humanoids, which are coming up, with the advent of AI, ML, which is coming up, there's nothing but more demand for pervasive, secure connectivity with the network services which are required, when they're required, and how they are required by that particular application to be consumed by that application. So as these evolutions happen, as the AI world, as the humanized world, as the V2V, V2X, the autonomous vehicles, autonomous cars world evolves, we believe that a network is going to become a very critical resource, more important than what it is. It is going to finally not just be a plumbing, it is going to be an intelligent asset which needs to be consumed in whichever form it is available for anybody to consume. And that's where the network programmability is going to play a very key role. Network API exposures are going to play a very key role. Either Kamara or some other organization will come through and capture that kind of innovation around that kind of a stuff. And I believe it is going to drive majority of the innovations in AI, ML, humanoids, V2Is, and all that wonderful stuff, because without connectivity, without network, none of it is possible. So it is going to happen. Network is going to play a key role, and it is going to from that perspective.
Absolutely. Now, if you were to leave a 10-second advice for mobile operators, what would that be? The sort of take-home message.
Think beyond connectivity, right? Think beyond connectivity. Think beyond your private networks. You need to adopt the network as a pervasive, intelligent asset. So it is not about limiting and boxing yourself into private networks. It's about actually utilizing whatever asset, the private, public, hybrid network asset that is available for you to enable that flexibility to increase the utilization of the network assets for your bespoke needs. So it is about creating, authoring, transforming, utilizing the network for your bespoke needs, and don't just box it to, oh, I just got a particular network and I'm going to live with that limitations out. Think beyond the type of network that you're working on.
Harpreet, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. It's been extremely informative and inspiring conversation. And I hope that our audience thinks the same. So thank you so much for
Thank you for
taking the time.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for listening to us. And we'll be seeing you on the next Sparring Partners. Thank you so much.